Hi, I'm Tochi from OpenFn. In this video, I'm going to walk you through how to create a workflow, how to use the workflow canvas, and how to design the step within that workflow. So let's get started. Before we begin, let's imagine that your organization is collecting patient data in a custom EMR application. Your government partner wants you to start sending newly registered patient records from your EMR application to its national DHIS2 system on a weekly basis. You have been asked to design a workflow to first extract the data from your application, which has a REST API that returns JSON data. Second, map the data elements to DHIS2 data model. And third, sync the patient records as tracked entity instance records in DHIS2. So let me show you how you can easily create that workflow. In your dashboard, click the Create New Workflow button, and a model will appear that will ask you what is the workflow name. So for this scenario, let's call this EMR to DHIS2 workflow, and then create that workflow. After you click Create a New Workflow, it will take you to a workflow canvas. This is the interface that is used to configure the workflow trigger, steps, and path. By default, you'll have two nodes created for you. The first node is a trigger, and by default, it's a webhook trigger. You have the ability to change this to a cron schedule trigger if your workflow requires a timer to initiate the workflow execution. Connecting the two nodes is the path. A path is both visual and functional indication that define the sequence of a workflow that travels between two nodes. A path condition indicates a condition that needs to be met for the workflow to continue past the previous step. The other node is the step node, and by default, it has a name of new job. If you click the step, which is called new job here, it will open up a configuration panel that contains the name of the step, the adapter, by default is common, the adapter version, which by default is latest, and an option to configure the credential. Now that we understand the basics of the workflow canvas, let's actually set up our workflow. From the requirement, we're supposed to set up a workflow that first, extract the data from a REST API service. Second, map the data to a DHIS2 data model. And third, sync the data to DHIS2 as tracked entity instance. And this workflow is supposed to run every week. So the first step I'm going to do here is first set up the cron trigger. We know that this workflow is going to run every week, so I'm going to set the frequency to every week. If you have a preference for the day, you can select which day you want to run for that week. I'm going to leave it to Monday. That seems to be fine with me. The second thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to set up now my first step in my workflow. And this is I need to fetch the records from a REST API service. I'm going to call this step Fetch Patients Records, because that is what essentially we'll be doing. And since I know that I'm connecting to a REST API, I'm going to use the HTTP adapter to be able to write my operation that fetches records from the REST API. You can select a specific version of the adapter, or you can leave it to latest. Just a word of caution, if you leave it to latest, that means whenever there's a new version of this adapter, this step will use that version. So if you don't want your workflow to break because of the new changes in the latest version, we advise you lock it to a specific version of that adapter. So let's lock this to version 6.0.0. Now that we are done with the first step, let's move on to the second step. So for the second step, we are required to map the data elements to the DHIS2 data model. There are two ways we can do this. We can either create a separate step and call it DHIS2 data mapping, So this step will be responsible for mapping the returned patient's record and map them to a DHIS2 data model. Once you create this step, then you can create the DHIS2 step, which is syncing the patient records to DHIS2. So we can call this sync patients records. And we know that we're talking to DHIS2, so this will have to be a DHIS2 adapter. The other way of doing this is you can combine this with the third step, which is syncing the patient records to DHIS2. To do this, we can rename this step as map and sync to DHIS2. Since we are connecting to DHIS2, we'll have to use a DHIS2 adapter. And again, it's always safe to pick a specific version of the adapter. To learn more about these step configuration details, like adapters and credentials, check out the OpenFn docs. Go to docs.openfn.org for more information. To add business logic or data transformation rules to your step, click the step, and when the panel opens on your right, click the coding icon to open up the OpenFn inspector. I'll cover more of this in detail in my next video. Thank you for listening, and catch you on the next one.